Welcome to excuse me. Okay, I think we're being recorded. Hello, good afternoon. My name is Joanne Bean. I'm the Vice President for Advancement at St. Joseph's College, and I welcome you to Front Row with the faculty. This is a series that we're very excited about because our faculty have an opportunity to select the topic areas and the subject matters that they'd like to discuss with you. You are right up front with them, and you're able to ask questions and engage in a really intimate way where we hope you get to know not only our faculty, but the college and its college movement forward and the direction that we're taking. So a little detail about Front Row with the faculty. I'll ask everyone to please mute their microphone. We need to do that so we don't have background noise. There's going to be a discussion, and then following that, there'll be a time for questions and a period for engagement with our speakers. This afternoon, we have three people that will be talking to us, two of our faculty members and one person who is our guest. Donato Tramuto is our honorary scholar in residence. He is absolutely a name that our campus knows widely, and we're anxious for you to get to know him a little bit more through this venue. So our two esteemed faculty members are professors who are engaged in the transformation of where the college is going in the future and what we're about to undertake, beginning very much right now and into next year. So you're going to hear that from them, and you're also going to hear from Donato Tramuto, who is, in fact, the person I'd like to introduce first, and then move on to our two esteemed faculty members. So Donato Tramuto is an activist in so many ways. He's a global healthcare activist. He is an author, just producing his second book that we're going to be talking about. He's also an individual who has had many leadership roles in his career path. He's a recently retired executive from Captivate Health, the president and CEO, and he and his partner, Jeff Porter, founded the Tramuto Porter Foundation. They are both engaged in the work of our students, and our students really focusing on many avenues of community, reaching out and engaging with community with hopes that they will graduate, of course, and do good for the world. So I could say many things about Donato, but one thing I will say is that he has that ability to really capture the essence of what an individual is struggling with, where they want to go in this world, who they want to become, and absolutely he mirrors our core values. So for that effort in all of his life and all of the things that he's done to help people, we are so honored and privileged to have him as our first honorary scholar in residence. He was a 2019 commencement speaker, and he's been engaged with the college ever since. He and the president, Jim DeLucas, met each other when they were both awarded the 2015 50 Mainer Award, meaning that they were one of 50 people that year who were recognized for their transformational behavior and work in our communities. So with that in mind, Dale and Kimberly, I'd like to introduce both of you. But I'd also like you to share more personally about your work at the college. So to that end, Dale, may I ask you please to facilitate the introduction by starting first and then moving on with Kimberly. Both of you have had a change in your role just recently at the college. You've stepped up to some new leadership pieces that relate to the subject matter today. So with that in mind, Dale, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joanne. Appreciate it. Hi, Donato. Great to see you again. I also like to point out, Joanne, that Donato was also our 2021 convocation or 2022 convocation speaker, 2021 convocation speaker just recently, where he shared some of his recent revelations even before the book went to press. He was happy to share some of that with us. So once again, Donato, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Dale Brooker. I'm the Associate Dean of Academic Initiatives and Innovation here at St. Joseph's College. One of my many hats, I'm also an Associate Professor of Criminal Justice. And I also work with Kimberley Post, who I'll introduce here in a minute, or have her introduce herself in a moment, who her and I have developed, along with a number of faculty colleagues along the way, a new program called Leadership for Sustainable Development. So we are looking forward to see that develop further. And some of the materials that Donato has graciously provided us with help inform some of those courses that we're getting to roll out as part of this program, which is a very much an interdisciplinary studies program that focuses on addressing some of the global, regional, and local concerns in our world with respect to the environment, respect to healthcare, respect to social justice related issues. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly to introduce herself, and we'll go back to Donato, and then subsequent to that, we'll have some Q&A and some conversation.
Thank you, Dale. Hello, everyone. Hello, sir. Good to see you again, Donato. So I'm Kimberley Post. I am a faculty member at St. Joseph's College. I'm the chair of the new program Leadership for Sustainable Development. I'm also part of the Center for Sustainable Communities. And over the last almost 11 years, I have been the director of community-based learning at the college. So community is a very integral part of the work that I do. And I'm looking forward to this conversation today, particularly around the idea of the connection between compassionate work and community.
Thanks, Kimberly. Let's turn it over to Donato. Quick introduction, Donato. Some of us don't need an introduction. We've known you well over this past year specifically, and we thank you for your time and dedication to your efforts here at St. Joseph's College, but also some of the great work that's come out of your book, which is hitting the charts on Amazon, as we just got another press release today. So thanks so much for that. Could you just tell us a little bit about how this book came about? And then Kimberly and I are going to perhaps launch into some questions that we have that are related to some of the work that we're doing with some of the folks that we work with, some of the traditional undergraduate students that we work with, along with some of the non-traditional students that we have in our online programs and certificate programs. So let's kind of start there. And if you want to kind of give us an overview and tell us about how the book came about, and then why it's so critical in this day and age to really focus on compassionate leadership.
Well, first of all, thank you. And to all of you and the participants who are here today, it really does speak to the example that you all are bringing, that we need to make the world a more compassionate and kinder place. And I thank you all for that. We're living in unprecedented times. Never before in our lifetime has there been such widespread disruption in our daily lives and major shifts in how people work, connect, and solve problems. When you just look at a few of the variables that I have been assessing over the last number of years, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on a population that many of us have been fighting for many years. Where you live, your social determinants of health now have a greater influence on your health outcome than your genetic code. It has recently been estimated that more than 50% are unable to aggregate $400 for an emergency fund. Pandemic, that I was one of the first leaders many, many years ago that called it out, that we are living now in a world of lost sense of relevancy. Last week in the New York Times, many of you may have read that loneliness now is on steroids. And it's not only with our older generation, it's with the younger people. In the last 6 weeks, I've known of 3 close friends who have attempted suicide, and 2 of them were under the age of 25. One was 17, one was 25. When you start to look at the racial unrest that's existing in our society, the social unrest, the division, the fact that we can't have a conversation, we're having versations, all of those variables prompted me to look at this and to really recognize that in my lifetime, when I have seen something wrong, I have followed the words of the Honorable John Lewis. When you see something wrong, you must do something, you must say something, you must act. And I appreciate the kind narrative that Joanne provided in terms of my past. But quite frankly, I don't want to be known as a successful businessman. What I hope that I will be known as is an individual who helped to move forward the notion that we can live together in a much more compassionate and kinder manner. And that's why I wrote the book. It was a lot of work. It encompassed years of my thinking about the format and, quite frankly, 2 years to write it. We did hundreds of hours of interviewing, 41 leaders, your own president and Sister Mary Scullion, who I know many of you know. She was one of the contributors to the book, as were political leaders and business leaders, and quite frankly, a 17-year-old young man who started an organization during COVID to help train seniors on how to use social media so he can pull them out of their state of loneliness. And so we not only interviewed 41 global leaders, we conducted a survey of 1,500 individuals across the United States, because I did not want anyone to say, this is the gospel according to Donato and 40 other leaders. I wanted to have hardcore data. All of you are in academia, and I know how important data is to all of you and how important it is to be objective. And so the book, Dale, to your calling it out, I am somewhat surprised, to be honest with you, that we have been rated #1 on Amazon in multiple categories. We're number 75 on Kindle, which they tell me is amazing. There are 1 million books out there, and to be rated number 75 is a great reflection, but it's a reflection of not so much the success of the book. It's a reflection of how people are starving for a new venue of leadership, one that starts off with compassion and kindness, one that starts off by listening to understand, don't listen to respond. And so I do hope that in whatever time I have left, I now measure my life by how many summers I have left. I think I have 20 summers left, I hope. I hope that those summers will, in fact, be encompassed with a movement and not so much just a book. This is a movement.
Thanks, Donato. Yeah, it is. And you know, what's interesting is that you were recently highlighted as saying that, you know, Gen Z really needs to be connected. They want to be connected with others. They're longing to belong is something that you noted. And it's interesting because when you say that, that's something that we did a little bit of research on in the development of this Leadership for Sustainable Development program that we have here at the college now. And one of the things that we found in terms of high school students going into college over the last 5 to 10 years is the fact that they want to be part of a community. And as you know, St. Joseph's tagline is where community grows. That's what we're about, but we're also wanting to cultivate conversations with students that really focus on how they can make a difference in the world today. So with that being said, what advice and I've heard the advice that you've given too, because I was there at Convocation back in the fall. What advice would you give to students who are coming out, college age students that are coming out of a really challenging time right now and into a world that is so much different than what their parents experienced, so much different than what many have experienced? What advice would you give them about how to, A, maybe take care of themselves, but B, think about how compassion can work in their lives? What's some advice from you that you would give to students coming to St. Joseph's College, for example?
Well, quite frankly, I think that they're already doing what I think we need to clearly understand. You know, you've heard the term, Dale, the Great Resignation. I don't think that's the right term. I think the right term is the Great Reflection. These young kids are reflecting on what they want to do. And that's a change for people, in my age group and perhaps folks in your generation. Remember, we have now 5 generations that make up the workforce. And so we are the ones that have got to kind of listen to these young Gen Zers and millennials who, quite frankly, are going to dominate the workplace. And They are saying we are not going to just go into the workplace and get a paycheck. I'll give you a great example that happened just with a Tramuto Foundation scholarship laureate, 25 years old. He joined a consultancy firm 6 weeks ago. You're going to love this story. And his founder, the founder of the company, his boss wanted him to work on Saturday. It was Friday night, like around 5 o'clock. And he said, you know, I really can't work Saturday because my friend is getting married in a few weeks and I'm throwing him a party, but I can do it on Sunday. The 48-year-old founder said the following: "You're worthless. I don't know why I have given you the paycheck I'm giving you. I am so sorry I hired you." Oh my God. So Nicolo called me and I provided the guidance and said, there's only one option you have, and that is to leave. That's a toxic culture. Now, my parents would have said to me, leave, be happy you have a paycheck. It's a job. Don't take it so serious. So we need to understand that this generation will not tolerate what I think many previous generations tolerated. And so my advice to them is stay the course, don't back off. That great reflection is that they need to have meaning in their jobs. And so this book is to really help train the generations that are not getting it, that still don't understand that the young generation need to have meaning in their life. They need to have flexibility in their life. It's a generation of minimalists. They don't care to own the best car on the street. They don't care to own the largest home. They will work hard, and we need to quit saying that they're lazy, that they just don't have any ambition. So I'm not so sure that I would tell them anything different than to stay the course.
And that's great advice. And it kind of resonates with some of the conversations that Kimberly and I were having just recently about your book. And they center around this notion of trust and reciprocity. I will point out that Robert Putnam in his book, Bowling Alone, really talks about honesty, trust, and reciprocity as a building core for social capital. But I'll leave that for a little bit later. But I'm going to turn it over to Kimberly because I know she has some questions with respect to trust and reciprocity that she wanted to ask. Kimberly?
Well, first, thank you. First, I just wanted to reflect upon what Dale, you had said earlier when we were researching in the process of building this new major, and also what was just said, that there are 78% of first-year students that have the desire to help others. They don't just want to have a job, just like you said, Donato. They want to be able to do good in the world. They want to be able to make a significant impact. And that's so exciting to me, but it's also, it kind of puts us in a new, we're moving into a new era. And I'm wondering how we can both teach that in the classroom and also model that for our students as they move forward.
Well, Kimberly, let me say this. I call this just coincidence. You know, when Joanne had reached out to me about the honorary scholar in residence, I was also at the same time being recruited by another institution. And I chose St. Joseph's because I felt that you guys were on the right path. We have not historically taught this compassionate leadership, kindness approach. Quite frankly, in business school, it's not being taught. And so you all should just feel extraordinarily proud. Call it coincidence here. We join as a honorary scholar in residence. I have this book in the back of my mind, and you all have this great idea of offering this course. Boy, I don't know if you've ever heard the word syzygy. It's the last word under S in the dictionary, and it means a perfect alignment of everything. We are aligned. And so I think what we can do is to continue to recognize that there is going to be a decade before this begins to take hold. I'm not that naive to really believe that all this is going to happen overnight. And I think that the more, this is why I call it a movement, the more, and I think that St. Joseph's College can be the exemplary banner. And I think this is going to help your enrollment, quite frankly, because the young people are looking, even with colleges, they're looking more for academic training. They're looking to be groomed to be, if you will, the next generation that drives these types of changes. So for you all, I would just say, be like a postage stamp. Stick to one thing until you get there. Don't deviate from what you are trying to do, because you are going to have some bumps in the road. I know I will have bumps in the road with this movement, but I don't know if you heard the news, and please keep this confidential, but we are meeting with the chairman of the Congressional Foundation in Washington, who reached out to me last week and said they heard about the book. They want to buy a copy of the book for every congressman, congresswoman, and every senator. And they want us to put a training program on. Music to my hearing aids. Now, I'm not that naive to think that all 500 plus are going to get on board, but if we can get 10% of those naysayers to recognize that we can disagree with one another and we can do it in a compassionate way. So this is a movement, and you all should be applauded, because we have several colleges and universities that are stepping up right now, that have reached out to me, that are just starting to think about what you already are offering. So there's not much more I can say than just stay the course.
So at the very beginning, you mentioned the role and the power of listening in building, mutual community, compassionate relationships. And I feel like you just touched on an area where we're seeing that listening really is not happening, and how vital it is moving forward. Can you talk more about listening, please?
Absolutely. And I love to give examples because it's the best way to do it. And you may never want to have dinner with me, because Joanne knows when I have a dinner event at the home, I always ask one or two questions of the dinner guest. And this just happened a few weeks ago. I asked the question of the 13 people around my table, tell me of a famous person to whom you would have loved to have been in their shoes and why. We went around, and the third person conveyed Ruth Bader Ginsburg. All of a sudden, another table guest attacked her without hearing and listening to her why. And I sat back and corrected then the situation. However, it was a great example that we are not listening to understand. We are listening to respond. And that was a great example. Had the individual taken the initiative, and by the way, I'm not telling you, it almost turned into a brawl at my home. Because what happened is that the person who communicated that felt that she wasn't being listened to and got off her. And I said, okay, let's everybody take a step back. So we've got to learn a totally different approach. It's why whenever I meet anyone, I ask them, tell me your story. And I shut up. I want to know everything about them. We need to do more of that. We need to train that in the most earliest segment of our lives. Don't react, don't respond. The person has a right to naming the individual to whom they, adore, and we need to understand the why. We don't have to say that that's a person that I would adore, but we need to acknowledge that. By the way, let me give you the conclusion. When we explained that at the table, the conversation turned in the right direction. The individual apologized to Gail and said, I was wrong for what I did. Donato was right. I should have listened to understand. And so we do give the techniques in the book. And I think that I'm hopeful that people will take it to heart. I know that I have erred along the way when I have reacted, and I can say, well, it's because I couldn't hear you because of my hearing loss. However, just bite your tongue for the minute or two. Let the person finish.
I can testify to everybody here that I have been the recipient of Donato's questions at dinner at our wonderful stone barn here on campus. We had a great time with you and Jeff, and that was some of the questions that you asked. And I have to admit, Donato, I was a little quiet for once because I had to think. I mean, you asked me, tell me your why, tell me your story, and it still resonates with me months later. I mean, this is in the summer, and here we are in April, and I appreciate that conversation because it kind of speaks to how how you envision what compassionate leadership looks like and how we listen. And that leads me to a couple of different things here. Number one is, in higher education, oftentimes the model is, faculty members get up, they share their expertise, they demonstrate their expertise by highlighting their scholarship, by highlighting research studies that they've been doing. One of the things that Kimberly and I and a lot of our faculty members here at St. Joseph's College do regularly is we do listen. We listen to what our students have to say. And I think we've been really in tune with some of the things that we're hearing from our students, especially during this very challenging pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a strength that we have, is that we do take time to listen in a variety of ways, whether it's through our advising, whether it's through conversations in the classroom, whether it's reflective practices that are taking place after a community-based learning experience. Can you tell me about what you think is the correlation between listening and trust?
Well, I think that there is a direct correlation, and that is if somebody has felt, I go back to what Maya Angelou said, who is one of my heroes. People will forget what you did. People will forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And when you have felt listened to at the most deepest core, and you're able to repeat back, by the way, Dale, I need to give you a little bit of an update on my questions. I've now changed the format, is that somebody at the table has to repeat back what they heard that person saying.
That's a good one, yeah.
And when you do that, and be willing to get corrected. There are times when I got the information wrong and the person will say, may I correct you? That's where the trust begins to get built. That's where the trust begins. And it takes time. It doesn't happen with one, by the way, the old saying, trust but validate. And I have been blessed in my lifetime with the kind of relationships that I have. And I, in many respects, believe it's because people have validated that I'm not full of, hot air, that I really do mean what I say, and I really do get deep into understanding what they're all about. And so trust is, I'll give you a great example. When I became the CEO of Healthways, which later became Captivate, we were in a very, very dire spot. We were on the verge of bankruptcy, the verge of shutting the company down. Now, I didn't get up there in front of 2,500 employees when I was inaugurated and say, hey, you know what? Trust me. You know what I said? I do not expect you to trust me right now. And I'm going to share with you the exact situation of the company. We are running out of money. We are on the verge of bankruptcy. We have one division that is in trouble. I am going to travel around and listen to you over the next 6 months, regardless what Wall Street wants. Wall Street wanted me to make a decision right away. I said pooey on them. And you know what? 6 months later, the decision I made was based on my having listened to 2,000 employees. And the decision I made was the best business decision. The stock went from $8 to $30 overnight on the decision I made. Not one employee lost their job. And a year later, after having 7 years of no bonus, every employee received 200% of their bonus the following year. Year 2, they received 150%. Year 3, 110%. That's how you get trust. You listen to what people are saying, and then you act upon the incorporation of everyone's opinion and actions. That's how you get trust. It doesn't happen on the first meeting. My gosh, how many of you have wonderful, wives, husbands, significant others? It didn't happen in the first date. It happened after a periodical, but we're living, unfortunately, as President Obama said, there is trust decay in our world right now. And I would say a lot of that trust is related to the fact that we believe that the first encounter, you win the trust. That doesn't happen at all. It is a process. By the way, let me just finish. Many of you have probably read that Howard Schultz has returned back to Starbucks in his third stint as CEO. There was a great article yesterday in the New York Times or Wall Street Journal, I forget. You know what he's doing? He's traveling around the country and listening to the employees. And the employees are saying, oh my gosh, it's the first time in 3-4 years that I have had any leader listen to me. He's doing what my favorite philosopher Yogi Berra once said: you can observe a lot by just watching.
Thanks, Donato. I'm gonna talk about trust for a moment, and then I'm gonna shift it over to Kimberly. But again, I'm a big Robert Putnam fan and his focus on social capital. I've been researching this notion of social capital for a number of years, but in Robert Putnam's book, and I want to get your take on this just for a moment because it relates to some of the work that we're doing in our program and trying to get the program developed and get students involved and active in it. Robert Putnam says the following, and I want your reaction to this. He says that people who trust, and this goes to what you're talking about in terms of civic and political life as well, because this is very timely given what's happening with your book and the possibility of it getting in the hands of politicians in our country. Robert Putnam says people who trust their fellow citizens volunteer more often, they contribute more to charity, they participate more in politics and community organizations, they serve more readily on juries, they give blood more, they are more tolerant of minority views, and display many other forms of civic virtue. This is Robert Putnam in his book, Bowling Alone. I'd like your take on that statement.
And if I recall, he talked about connections. He talked about this, it's very interesting to really understand what he is trying to say and look at what President Obama said about, trust decay. For whatever reason, we have lost connections. We don't trust the churches anymore. We don't trust business people anymore. We've lost trust in our physicians and our healthcare. And it hasn't happened overnight. There's been an enormous deterioration, and it's not the pandemic. Many people come back and say it's the pandemic. And so his sense that connection among individuals and having social networks, that it has an enormous understanding of building the kind of trust that can create, if you will, commitments. And so you're right. It is something, and that's why I'm saying is that we've got to go back to understanding, how did we lose the trust? I think in many respects, we created it ourselves. I think in many respects, we didn't have, if you look at the congressmen, they're no longer in, their locations where they got elected. They're in Washington, they're out campaigning. And so think about that network that got disrupted in 1994, when Newt Gingrich said, listen, get out of Washington, go and campaign, but they didn't go into their community. Look at the police force, that we've lost that sense of community policing. So I really do think that, and I'm not an expert on, Putnam's theory, but I do believe that his focus on community is exactly what we're saying here. My last point, I challenge us in the book that it's not going to be one person. We're all looking for the Robert Kennedy. We're looking for the Dalai Lama. We're looking for Gandhi. It's not going to be one person who will lead us through this. It's going to be a community of people. And I think that does tie in to, his theory.
Thanks. I'll turn it over to Kimberly. I know she has some questions about reciprocity and a little bit more about leadership for sustainable development.
Well, you keep going back to reciprocity, which is definitely was at the top of my list for what I wanted to talk with you about. At the college, we have a very strong history of doing community-based learning within our academics, and reciprocity, having reciprocal relationships between the college and community, that's an integral part of the ethos. I'm wondering if maybe that's a piece that we're missing now in our regular relationships. You were talking about the lack of connection, the inability to listen well. I'm wondering if we're forgetting that in order to really nurture a healthy, sustainable community, we need to remember that we're in reciprocal relationships with each other. We're in collaborative relationships.
Well, I use a word in the book, if you recall, I use the word collaboration. We have been too focused on innovation. And if you're not an innovator, then you really don't have much value in society. And that's why I say we have to move away from just rewarding innovation. Look at technology. We've been rewarding technology. And I think technology, quite frankly, has gotten us in trouble. because what's happening is that we forgot about the human connections. And so I'm not saying that technology should be thrown out entirely. What I'm saying, collaboration is the coming together of innovation and the coming together of recognizing the higher your collaborative IQ, the more you will be able to get done. And I think that's exactly what, Robert Putnam, I think in his theory was trying to communicate, is that there has been some decline in this whole sense of connections. And it's the same thing with our politics. Why can't I, if I disagree with the actions of a policeman or a policewoman, why can't I be able to communicate that without being accused of being anti-police? And so we're living in this absolutism right now that you have to be on one side of the camp or the other. And that's why I think this collaboration, this community, this listening to build that trust again is why I think and I'm optimistic. I'm not a pessimist at all. I think our younger generation are going to demand that. They're going to demand more of this community awareness, more about the civic responsibilities. And I think they're going to be the ones to lead us forward around this whole notion. It begins with listening, it begins with trust, it begins with commitment, and begins with cooperation.
I love that what you said, the collaborative IQ. I mean, that's pretty spot on right there. And Dale and I were talking earlier about, I think it's chapter 7 of your book about Thistle Farms. And there's this quote there from the woman.
Becca Stevens.
Thank you. And she said, community is the entity by which compassion happens. And that is that screams amazing to me. I was wondering if we start to flip around the idea of community and compassion so that we understand that compassion, that community is what happens with, see, I can't even describe it any better than, do you know what I'm getting at, Donato?
I actually do, and knowing Becca as well as I do, I mean, I have to tell you, she is an amazing individual who, I've gone to her religious services in Nashville. Her understanding of how to bring people together, she is, much more in the modern age of, clergy in terms of making it fun during the ceremony, but also recognizing that there's older people in there and balancing it. And that's the thing I think it's all about is balance. And nobody has demonstrated. It's funny, we're working on a loneliness initiative with Becca, and she keeps on reminding us that it's the community that's going to solve this issue. It's not just going to be us coming up with interventions. You got to really bring the community. What you're doing at St. Joseph's with respect to the Silver Sneakers program, bringing the young and the old together. I love, and I think I use this quote in the book by John Kennedy, a rising tide lifts all boats. And what I love about that is his, in his inaugural speech, he communicated that if you improve the financial economics of a community, all people are affected. We saw that during the pandemic, right? I got vaccinated not for myself. I got vaccinated for the entire population. And so we really have to stress this community. Unfortunately, we have lowered ourselves to this individualism. And it is very sad in terms of what impact that has had on our life. But I think the pandemic has also taught us how important it is to have relationships, how important it is to do the good, not necessarily for ourselves, but do good things for the benefit of the community. That's what population health is all about.
You said you said being independent, and independence has always been, of course, it's at the root of being a U.S. citizen, correct? We all want to be independent people, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's almost like the opposite of independence is interdependence. And I do believe that moving forward, we're going to need to really recognize our innate interdependence. We all need each other, and we all depend upon each other, and leadership is going to need to reflect that.
Well, I think we have an example unfolding on the world stage right now with Ukraine. I think that what President Zelensky has done in terms of his compassionate leadership, understanding his people, the way they have come together as a community, the empathy that he has shown and the action that he has taken is remarkable. And by the way, one of the things that we uncovered in our research is when a leader lacks empathy, they lose the ability to adapt their approach. They become very closed-minded. And what are we seeing with the one leader who's bombing hospitals and where pregnant women and children reside? And so empathy is about this opportunity to listen to people and to feel their pain, which is about the community, to understand. Again, I go back to the pandemic. Gosh, hundreds of thousands, millions, now 1 million people have died. And if you would have looked at what we could have done better, I would say we could have taken a much more focus on a community coming together. And in some areas it did. I'm very proud of the state of Maine. I think Maine was really a beacon for how they demonstrated how a community could come together. And look, we had the lowest death rate, the lowest infection rate. And so you are absolutely right. It took us probably 30, 40 years to get to this individualism that I think has dominated our society. I don't think it's going to take us 30, 40 years to get out of it. I think people are starving for some change. And that change, I think, is about being more compassionate, being more community focused, and being a tad kinder. This morning I went out, I've been locked in my office for all week with interviews, and I decided I would go out for coffee this morning. And whenever I go anywhere, I just smile. I went to this coffee shop, and there was this two older women, and I had my book with me because the barista had asked for a copy of the book. And I put it on the counter and I smiled at them. And they said the double bottom line, "Oh, this is very interesting. Are you enjoying the book?" I said, "Yes, I'm the author." Well, anyway, we ended up hugging each other at the end. And that's what I think we have to do. It starts in small little steps. And if everyone can do that, my favorite quote is my own quote, which is, "It's not about doing great things. It's about doing little things that have the capacity to drive great change. If we all can do something little, share a hug, a handshake, say something encouraging, practice a little act of kindness, motivate others. If we can all do that, that's what really moves a community forward. And we've lost that, unfortunately. Look at, people living in rural America. The closest relative now, if you're living in rural America, is about 230 miles away. And so a lot of this has been created by our geographical distance. And we think that this solved it, and it didn't solve it at all. It actually made it a tad worse in terms of our connection.
Well, Donato, I think that's a tremendous note for us to open this up for questions from our participants. Dale and Kimberly, are you all set for that? Does that sound good?
We could probably go on for a long time with Donato, Joanne, but we're good. Let's take some time to answer some questions.
Right. Let's take some time to do that, and certainly anything more that our three speakers have to say. But
I have a question. My name's Rob. I've recognized, the part that you were talking about, having connections with people. I went to, I've been in industry myself in a job for 34 years, and I see how, the importance of people first, above the product and the end goal of an organization, of a job. And I went to St. Joseph's College, and I got my master's certificate in pastoral ministry because I wanted to make connections with people, because I saw that was, you could see the way the society is changing, and so by getting that connection with people that I go to, and the elderly homes that I go to, yes, I'm a volunteer, registered volunteer at 3 of them, and that connection of listening to people, just to be with them for who they are, for what they want to say, and not have a bias. And I'm not there for my own I think that that's a really important thing in education, that I wish, my whole life a professor, and I was brought up in that way. But, I always recognize, and I think it's an important, would you say that it's an important part of education that, maybe in the technical parts of schooling, education, and, how it's job focused, that maybe, having that pastoral connection, our faith connection is very important. How would you, what would you think in respect to that?
Well, Rob, that's music to my hearing aids. I don't know if you know my past. I spent 7 years in the seminary, and
wonderful. Yeah.
I always tell people I left because I didn't want to work on Saturday and Sundays. Now I work every day. But all kidding to the side, I do think faith plays a very important part. I was fortunate that I was educated by the Sisters of St. Joseph. I was educated by Jesuit priests in the seminary, and that I developed an enormous sense of focus on people. And I think that my pastoral experience probably had more value in my business life than my business degrees. Now, that said, quite frankly, I don't think that we're going to ever change institutions to include that. And so how do we in the community bring back that notion? I am one of 7, and not all of my brothers and sisters went to the seminary, but they did get educated Sunday with our family after Mass, after church, and we were basically taught these values of community. I was telling somebody the other day, we grew up very poor, and our next door neighbor, the husband had died of cancer. And 2 years later, his wife ended up getting cancer. Every Sunday, my mother, we had 9 mouths to feed at home, but every Sunday, my mother sent over to our next door neighbor a pot of red sauce, spaghetti, meatballs, and a dessert every Sunday, despite the fact that there were 9 other mouths that had to be, fed at our home. When you see that and you observe that,
yep.
That's the kind of faith-based commitment you bring. And so when I launched the foundation, I had somebody who said, why do that? Why would you do that? And I said, it's because I learned this from my parents, that they gave back when they had nothing to give back. And it wasn't until my parents passed away that I realized, oh my gosh, all they left was their home, which I didn't care, but they left their $40,000 home. That was their entire estate. I never knew that we were, that kind of situation, but they made their love get expanded to others. And so I think you're right. We've got to go back to what really we all had, and we were fortunate to have that growing up.
Open to other questions for Donato or Kimberly or myself. We have about 10 minutes left. Happy to entertain anything.
Well, I'll tell you, if there are no further questions, I would like to share with all of you that it's important that we put our definition of compassionate leadership to work. And Joanne and I, before this call, we worked on what we will establish is the Tramuto Porter Foundation Compassionate Leadership Scholarship at St. Joseph's. We will begin funding that this year, so you can begin to select your students. And my hope is that this will grow into a sizable endowment that will, in perpetuity, reward and honor students in your program that are demonstrating compassion. And so this is my hope, my quest and my dream, that it will begin one student at a time, but I would be violating my definition if all I did was to talk and not show action. And so we're doing this not only at St. Joseph's, We're doing this at 3 other colleges. And, I suspect that we'll do it at more. And so to Kimberly's, I think it was Kimberly who raised this, or maybe it was you, Dale, who raised the question of, how do we teach this? My hope is that, we'll do it, one student at a time. And, fortunately, we'll have 4 or 5 colleges that will be honoring these students.
Yeah.
And we can't thank you enough for your support, Donato. It's definitely going to go to great use. It's not only your treasure, but it's your time and your talent that we really appreciate that you provide to us, your perspective. We really think that students that go through our interdisciplinary program become great leaders, become advocates, become volunteers, become people that kind of carry on the St. Joseph's legacy. Will be supported by you, and we can't thank you enough. So again, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you greatly.
Well, but I send that thank you back to you, Dale, and it has really been just a joy to be in partnership with such a compassionate group of leaders. I love St. Joseph's. Every opportunity I have, I talk about St. Joseph's, and so listen. I know at times we may find that the path is a long and very windy road. Yeah. However, by working together, we will leave this world a better place. I'm convinced by that. I have great hope for the young because I do think that they are further ahead than perhaps when I was their age or when you were their age. And so I am really motivated. Catherine Markler, who's on this call, who's our executive in the foundation, 23-year-old, young woman who just inspires me every day and has taught me so much. And that's the type of receptivity that I think we have to have, is that you don't have to be taught by a 60-year-old. I can learn as much from a 23-year-old as I hope that Catherine is able to learn from this guy. And so we have to make it okay to be vulnerable. We have to make it okay to say that, you know what, I'm hard of hearing. I don't think I am understanding everything that you're saying. And if we can do that and teach that early on to individuals like Catherine, wow, I hope that by the time my 20th summer has, elapsed, that I will see at that point a much, much more compassionate world than perhaps what I'm seeing here today.
You mentioned vulnerability, Donato, and that is actually something else that I wanted to talk about today. We didn't have time to get to that, but it is something that as somebody that's been teaching for 20 plus years in higher education, that I've been mindful of in my own practice, and that's to be vulnerable. And we're going through some stressful times, and I try to relay to students, and we were talking about this before with Kimberly and I were talking about this before. We try to be vulnerable so that students know that we're human. We're not, we have our ups and downs like anybody else, and we feel the pressures that they're feeling as well. And I think that that's really critical, to be vulnerable with students, but still hold them accountable, of course. But giving a little piece of yourself, really builds that trust. So that's something that we've worked on over the years here.
Well, please don't do what that founder of the company did. I was just like, you got to be kidding me. And it really is heartbreaking, because I think, and I may be wrong, you deal with the young people more than I do. I think they have it harder than us. I have never seen a time period where there is so much going on in the world, the pandemic, the social unrest, the division. There is so much that's going on, and it breaks my heart that these young people are in the middle of it. So I really think we have to not do what this founder did and say to the employee, you're worthless. That just is not the right, remember, it's not the great resignation, it's the great reflection. And if we can keep that in mind, these young kids are reflecting about their lives more than perhaps we ever did during the course of our journey. Thank you all. I'm going to have to, because as Joanne knows, and some of you are welcome to join this next call, but we, during the pandemic, we had, again, talk about acting. I had felt that there were a lot of disconnected people, and we launched the Inspire chat calls And we suspended them for the last 6 months, and now we're changing it to the compassionate leadership inspired calls. And we have our first kickoff call, a kickoff call here in a few minutes. So I'm hoping that monthly having these calls that we can help this group chapter by chapter. We're going to dissect each chapter to help individuals really understand what was meant in the book around compassionate leadership. Thank you all. You're great. I love you.
Donato. And
Thanks,
and
Donato.
the book, it can be found on Amazon. Please know that you'll be hearing from Donato on our campus over the next several years, talking about this as Dale and Kimberly and other faculty members roll out this wonderful new curriculum. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Joanne, by the way, remind everyone that all the royalties are going to 7 organizations, and St. Joseph's is one. So the more books we sell, the more that goes into the scholarship fund. Thank you all.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kimberly. Thank you, everyone.